professor in the Asian American Studies program and anthropology department at CSU Fresno. She received her PhD in interdisciplinary humanities from the University of California, Merced, and her research interests include examining the intersections of race, religion, empire, and anti-colonial practices in Punjab and the American West in the early 20th century. Our next speaker is Sharanjit Sandhra. Dr. Sharanjit Sandhra is a historian, faculty at the Department of History at the University of Fraser Valley, senior program advisor in the Multiculturalism and Anti-Racism program with Canadian Heritage, and founder of Belonging Matters Consulting. Sharon worked as the coordinator at the South Asian Studies Institute at UFV for more than 12 years and as a co-curator and co-manager of the Sikh Heritage Museum, a National Historic Site, and Buddhist Tejpaul Gurdwara in Abbotsford. Her PhD looks at the effective experiences on museum visitors through a critical race theory lens with their dissertation is titled Museums as Spaces of Belonging, Racialized Calibrate in the Margins. Sharon is a passionate activist building bridges between community and academia through her community work. And next up we have Satpal Sidhu, who immigrated in 1978 from Punjab and is a Canadian and U.S. citizen, currently elected as the Whatcom County Executive since 2019. He was the chair, or is the chair, of the Arts on Healing and Reconciliation Committee to build the 1907 Bellingham Riots Memorial Monument in Bellingham for the early immigrants from India in the Pacific Northwest. And then last but not least, we have Johanna Ogden, who is an independent historian and activist focusing on Punjabis in the early 1900s Oregon. She is the author of several Oregon historical quarterly articles and the most recent Punjabi Rebels of the Columbia River, the global fight for Indian independence and citizenship. Thanks for moving up. I was just telling them earlier that for now, I'm going to just be a fan and just sit back and listen to these four making speakers talk about their work. Very intentional panel that we brought together, and this was to really share and highlight the stories of different experiences of South Asians here in the Pacific Northwest. So to begin, I'm going to hand it over to Amrit Deol.
Right. Thank you, Tejpaul, and thanks to everyone for being here today. I know it's just after lunch, so I am thrilled that people still make it out. Julian, no. I'm such a loud, teacher voice that I forget to use the microphone. That is the Asian woman that hates it. So thank you all for being here. Thank you to the organizers for bringing me out here and being able to share my work with all of you. I, like Tejpaul said, I'm an assistant professor in Fresno in Central California. It's another state that is so important to Asian American history. And really what's inspired me to get into learning about the Pacific Northwest. And it's taking me past over 100 years. So what I'm going to talk about today is providing some context for South Asian immigration and to why this state particularly matters to this community. And hopefully we can start engaging in a questions around faith, memory, history, and thinking about potential future for that as well. So my presentation is entitled Early History of the South Asian Americans in the Pacific Northwest. Just because that's where I'm generally starting, and also I'm horrible at coming up with titles that are creative. You know that it will not go stomach collision problems, isn't it? So what I wanted to start with is a very basic sort of understanding of what brought South Asians to this space particularly, and then how that becomes important in their journey to finding other aspects and manifestations of home along the American West. And beginning there in the Pacific Northwest, South Asians have a very critical relationship with this region. And it's a transborder region, right? And that's, the roots of that go back to the British Empire, right? So at the time in the early 1900s, late 1800s, the British controls the political, social, and economic sort of aspect of South Asia, and it really forced a sense of migration of laborers from South Asia to find employment in other regions of the world, and it brought them to Canada, primarily first. And so South Asian immigration actually begins on the other side of the U.S.-Canada border in British Columbia. In the late 1800s, but more largely in the early 1900s, lumber mill owners in Vancouver area and largely BC requested labor to fill their labor gap and actually contracted a lot of South Asian laborers to come to that space. And so newspaper articles from that time period opened them with welcoming arms to come through and fulfill that labor gap in lumber mills and also in the emerging railway industry. And so South Asians soon arrived to that space as contracted laborers. And to give a general idea, the number between 1899 to 1913 it's less than 10,000. So it's not a huge number, but that of course begins to grow as the decades progress. And so for today, I haven't necessarily thought about space before in my work. I am a very boring traditional historian where I just go to the archives, think about paper and books, and that's it, and I leave. And so talking to Tejpaul and others and following the work of my fellow panelists, I've really started to think about space and how we can memorialize space and the multitude of meaning that brings on in today's context. And so that also makes me think about archive in a lot of different ways, including its tangibility and accessibility. And so what I want to offer today is a brief overview of one such immigration journey that begins on the other side of the U.S. border and then trickles into the Pacific Northwest that ends at the other border. So this isn't an overarching history, but it's one that hopefully will garner some kind of conversation. So like I said, most of the folks that arrived in the early 1900s from South Asia came over as laborers. And they primarily were located in British Columbia. However, racial tensions were rising, and so was the need to find further employment. And that brought South Asian laborers across the border into Washington. Most of the early immigrants that came over as laborers during this period came from the northern region of South Asia, known as Punjab. And in line with most Asian immigrants at the time, most were young men aged 18 to 35 of prime labor age. 90% of these early immigrants were from Sikh Punjabi belonging families and from small peasant families as well. While the South Asian American experience is unique and part of a very diverse Asian American fabric, it is important to note that the arrivals were walking into a Pacific Northwestern space that was already facing rising rates of racial tensions and anti-Asian sentiment. We see Filipino, Chinese, and Japanese communities facing similar discriminations on micro meaning local, meso meaning state, and macro meaning national and international levels. Many of these discriminations manifested through policy and social consequences, and so that's not something that is uncommon for folks in this era. However, in terms of looking at the South Asian experience, we see that because they have that transnational and transborder experience, there's a different tinge to it here. So before their arrival into the U.S., there's warnings that are sent out to the media and public discourse describing South Asian laborers as invaders and threat, and also some kind of issuing of invasion. This early anti-South Asian, anti-Hindu rhetoric emerged as early as 1906, even prior to large numbers of immigration. So while the invasion, or the quote-unquote invasion, is on the rise, we start to see sentiment against this community, anti-Hindu sentiment and anti-South Asian sentiment rise as well. So not being able to create legal policy to limit South Asian immigration, there's a series of violent riots that emerge and unfortunately take place in places like Bellingham, Washington, and then proceed to occur in Everett, Danville, and St. John's. And that's, of course, a reason why we need to start a conversation around looking at faith. Now, there's certain racial and religions that surround the South Asian identity in this early 20th century period that provoked further discrimination. And again, I want to reiterate that this is a part of the rising anti-Asian sentiment that most communities were facing. But there's also uniqueness to this as well that I think we need to dive into a little bit further. Hopefully we can do that with Q&A. There's greater demand for legal solution, quote-unquote, that's rising tremendously. And we see violence used as a form of retaliation and a method for retaining facial control and domination. In response to the rising retaliation from other workers in the Pacific Northwest, which is primarily the border region, found Asian laborers find motivations to move further and further south. So we begin our journey today in talking about those folks that arrived to the shores of British Columbia. And we start to see in just a few years that violence and retaliation and racial discrimination causes folks to move further and further step down south to spaces like Oregon. And Oregon has its own very unique history, which one of my amazing fellow panelists is going to talk about today, and I'm super hyped about that. So we start to see the formation, more critically, of a new emerging space known as Hindu towns. That is where South Asians primarily congregate. They're also semi-foreign labor camps and actually facilitate a sense of community, belonging, and also safety. Even though some of these spaces don't exist in the same form today, if we were able to come up with some kind of way, perhaps we can think about methods memorializing these spaces. And similar spaces formed then later in California as well, and as far down south as the Imperial Valley and even Mexico. And they're modeled after these Oregon spaces. In around 1912, so just a few short years after those large numbers of immigration began, we start to see political activism forming in the Pacific Northwest. And it gets called to one of the most critical political organizations to come out of the South Asian diaspora, known as the Dalit Party. I'd be more than happy to talk about that in the Q&A, but that's just a little teaser out there. And there's a numerous amount of spaces that are dedicated to this space, including that story of Oregon and the city. Motivations for political action, motivations for finding further labor, push these individuals to move further down south into the growing agricultural industry of California. In this, we have rising rates of settlement within California and Central Valley, which serves as my home today and the home of my family going quite a few years back. And then we see a creation of home and settlement through the institution of the first Sikh temple or Gurdwara in Stockton, California. While the Stockton, California is well known and some circles, we consider it to be a popular space with those that are familiar with South history. The Pacific Northwest is really the key to understanding of art, what created that sense of community. And that goes back to those understandings of human towns and labor camps. Further sort of urging us to look at faith and its meaning amongst this community. We have legal retaliation that come through, unfortunately, in policy, like the decision made in the United States versus Singh in 1923, which classifies South Asians as Asian for the first time and takes away any access to whiteness and, of course, then to citizenship as well, marking a new catalyst in that immigration journey, which pushes individuals even further down south. So as we begin this story in the first part, in the northern border of Canada, we end in the conversation 2 minutes later than I should have in discussing very briefly the emergence of a similar type of community with a similar ethos that emerged in the Pacific Northwest in the southern border of the Imperial Valley near Mexico. And so I wanted to just show a brief image of what settlement looked like in just a matter of 2 decades. This is the Sikh temple located in the Imperial Valley, which actually I was born and raised, and it's right on the border of Mexico and Mexicali, and it serves as an interesting reminder to all that happened within those 2 decades of Asian immigration. So hopefully what we're going to do today is talk about faith and place in a lot of critical ways. But that's all the time that I have. So I appreciate you all and happy to take any questions and Q&A. Yeah, thank you. Okay. You can hear me okay, loud and clear? Okay, Bonnie. Thank you for that, Amrit. I love when presentations work out so beautifully and synchronously because you spoke about the history and I'm going to speak about spaces because that is what I love to do. And so before I begin talking about this image that you see in front of you, and I'll explain a little bit about its history and how it connects to space, museums, and memorialization, I want us to erase concepts of order in our mind first and foremost. So the Pacific Coast histories are really, really important. From San Francisco, Oregon, Bellingham, Seattle, and then to British Columbia, I want us to erase the ideas of borders and boundaries. And that's kind of what I'm going to be talking about today in relationship to Sikh history in the Fraser Valley, in British Columbia, and Abbotsford, which is where I live. And so this site that you see in front of you, for people who don't know, is a National Historic Site, Canada. It is the oldest still standing Gurdwara or Sikh sacred space in the entire Western Hemisphere. So the first Sikh sacred space was actually built in Vancouver on West 2nd Avenue a year or so before this one that you see in front of you was built. But unfortunately, because they did not have the wherewithal to keep and preserve that site on West 2nd Avenue, it was torn down. And so what remains now is a plaque kind of memorializing that this first sacred space did exist. Luckily for us in our community, different thinkers prevailed because there was a time when there was conversations about selling the Gurdwara space and tearing the building down because it's on one of the most viable, populous, building construction heavy streets in all of Abbotsford, BC. So luckily it stands as this today, a beautiful building that is now a Sikh Heritage Museum in the ground floor. But just to speak a little bit about the history of this site and why it matters. So Amrit mentioned a little bit about the history of the first Sikhs who came into the Sikh region. They came from the northwest region of Punjab. They weren't mostly Sikhs, but they were also people from other faith groups. There were Hindus and Muslims who came, but in truth of the vast majority of the community, they were Sikhs. And the reason why it was those of the Sikh community who came is because they came from a history of serving in the British Empire. And so there was a pattern and a comfort of movement through bodies of water, through service in the British Empire and the British colonial state, right? And so it was really easy, while at the same time the British were trying to colonize parts of Canada, Sikhs saw themselves as being a part of that movement to settle and live in Canada. But unfortunately, as was explained by Amrit, when they came here, it wasn't the case that they were wanted, right? They were seen as the undesirable immigrant. There was a very specific sort of immigrant that was wanted across the Turtle Island, US-Canada region. But regardless, for the few Sikhs who did come to Abbotsford, by 1908, they wanted to start construction on the building of this Gurdwara. And so they worked for a local sawmill company called the Abbotsford Chitui Lumber Company. And there was about 46 men, and they said, would you donate the lumber that will help build this Gurdwara? So luckily, the white owner of the terrain did say, yes, whatever you can carry on your back, consider it yours. And so these men would work about 12, 14-hour shifts at the lumber company and walk half a kilometer up to build this Gurdwara that you see in front of you. And it took about 3 years. So it did take time because of the small size of the kid. Now, here's the thing about memory. For a very long time, I told this story, and this story stayed the same. The story was the white lumber company are amazing, they're benevolent, and they gave to the lumber, right, to the Sikh. But during the Black Lives Matter resurgence in June of 2020, a newspaper clipping emerged. And I should have included it in the slide, so my apologies for not including it. But the newspaper clipping highlighted that in 1906, the founder of the Abbotsford Loafer Company also happened to be Abbotsford's first KKK chapter, right? Just having back. It's like the beauty of history in many ways. It's the beauty of archive. And it's the power of the erasure of the archives when we don't acknowledge things that have existed very blatantly. It talks about the values of the KKK. It talks about Mr. S.D. Chatuli saying, I'll pay $10 to become the founding member of the KKK. And yet they said, sure, Sikh men, take the lumber and build your Gurdwara, right? This is how history operates. History doesn't operate in black and white. History operates in gray. And so for a very long time, when I would give tours of this Gurdwara space and the museum space to countless numbers of students in the K-12 systems, university students, to educators, anybody from the community, I told them this story exactly as I told it to you. And I will tell children as young as 5-year-olds the story of the KKK, because if they're young enough to experience the racism, they're young enough to understand how that history operates, right? But I tell them this is the complexity of history. You have a family that is donating the lumber to build a Gurdwara that exists today, but the founding member also happened to be Abbotsford KKK chapter. And in the Canadian context, we tend to very hyper-nostalgize our history and then assume that we're better than the U.S., right? And so part of why I try to teach that history and to remind people we are not better than the U.S. We're just much better at hiding our histories and erasing history, right? And the example of that archive being erased is the perfect example. It was in the Abbotsford map we used. It was there. But for 100 years, it did not exist in our ethos, in our memory making, in the production of history. It took Black Lives Matter resurgence, and somebody was covering that to say, did you know this existed? And then it appeared in the Vancouver Sun, right? Just so you know, I haven't really prepared it. This presentation, I'm just kind of winging it right now. It's like, oh, I don't know where I'm at in terms of timing. 5 minutes, 3 minutes, okay. So I want to talk a little bit and take their Q&A after as well about the power of solidarity. And again, think about erasing the borders. So this picture is a very iconic picture after the 1907 anti-Asian riots in Vancouver. So we've heard a little bit about how the anti-Asian riots, or they were mostly anti-Sikh riots, happened in Bellingham. And I'm sure Satpal will talk a little bit about that as well. But again, it was that movement from Bellingham. It was like a sea of hate that moved from Bellingham because the messaging was there that Sikhs are being pushed out of the city. And then it ended up in a very prominent Asian-owned area of Powell Street in Vancouver. So this is the next day after I think it was September 1907 anti-Asian riot. Now, if you Google search this picture, the Sikh man on the right-hand side is often cut off. You have to sometimes purchase the Vancouver Public Library full archive picture to see the fullness of this picture. So again, another reminder of how archives are, and patterns of erasure. So I was giving tours of colleagues of mine from the Canadian National Museum, which is a Japanese museum in Burnaby, British Columbia. And their curator said to me, Sharon, do you know the history of this picture? And I said, no. It's a very iconic picture, but oftentimes, like, A, the Sikh man is cut off, and B, nobody knows, who are these people. We just assume they're all separate from each other. So they interviewed the little baby that is being held by the Japanese woman sticking her head out the shop, right? She's holding a little baby. So they interviewed the baby as an older woman. She was, I think, 80 or so when they interviewed her. And she told them the story that the Sikh man and the group of friends were best friends with her dad. And so after the riots happened, they had just finished sweeping and cleaning up the shop. They stood outside this window and, somebody took a picture. And it became etched in time forever as this unnamed, image that we assume these communities are separated from each other. Why I was so struck by that story, and I included it in one of my chapters of my dissertation because it was powerful. And it was in that moment that I decided to include the Canadian National Museum as one of my case study sites because of that story. But why it was powerful to me is that it reminded me of this word solidarity. And it was mentioned very beautifully in one of the keynote plenaries this morning. When we talk about solidarities, our power is actually in the margin. Ray Bell's concept of power in margin. So when we start to look at our relationships to each other, not in relationship to whiteness all the time, we realize that our strength is actually our relationships to each other historically. We forget that, we live in these spaces, intimate spaces, where we go working together, eating together, having relationships with each other, marrying each other, right? Because we're so interested in only talking about our histories in relationship to white supremacy. And so I'm really interested in looking at spaces, including museum spaces, that are for us by us. And I also want to say that when we talk about solidarity, we also need to talk about anti-Blackness in Asian communities, and we need to talk about Palestine as well, because these are the things that we are afraid to talk about. So with that, I'll end. Thank you.
All right. My name is Satpal Sidhu, and I am from Vietnam. And my parents did both this hard. Okay. I just wanted to show you the history. You've heard all the history, and I'm not going to talk about the same that history again, because I want to talk about how we have made an effort to preserve that history. So you can see Abbotsford, Vancouver, Bellingham. And before that didn't exist in those days, even there was United States and Canada, it was just like there was no I-5 either. Only you could come by these steamers, only to Seattle. That was the way. So then Bellingham had a lot of big lumber mills. And that's all these people. You can come to Canada very easily. You didn't need much papers. You just have to show I was born in India and part of the English Dominion. So you can just get a ship and come there. So that's why a lot of people came there. And then they found that they found jobs in Bellingham, lumber mills, and they come and start working there. And there were about 350 people living in Bellingham since 1904, once we found the records of it. And then once they start growing, there was an animosity going on. All these immigrants come, they take our jobs away. They say, well, thing we get a couple of 100 years later, and the immigrants come take the jobs away. And that's what was being talked about. And another thing is they were come here to make money, and they would work on weekends, they would work on Sunday. That was not good with Christian people. It's God's day. You should not work on a Sunday. And they said, I got to send money to my family. and the owners were also English white people. And they wanted to open their mill on Sunday. That was okay. But it was only the workers white who worked on a Sunday. But that kind of animosity or this kind of rhetoric got a lot of expansion by the local community, and they worked with the local police, mayor, and the county people, whosoever the government was, and they said that, how should we expel these people? They said, well, you can do whatever. So they had, in town of 50,000 people, there was only one policeman on duty on that night. So they a crowd gathered, and they start pulling them from their workplace, from their homes, and from the mills. And they roughed them up. Thank goodness nobody was killed. Some people were hurt. And they pulled them out and start scaring them. This was right on the waterfront in Bellingham. That's where the mills were. And they were all gathered. And then the police suddenly came at around midnight. And they said, well, we'll put you in the jail because that's the only place you are safe. So they put everybody in a small jail they had at the city hall at that time. And that's where they put them all together in that jail. In the morning, the community got together, the mayor and everybody. They said, it's out of our hands, and we cannot guarantee the safety of your life and property. So we give you 48 hours to leave town. There used to be only one train between San Francisco and Vancouver, one up, one down. And that's what they did. So within 2 days, they didn't even collect their wages. They were not even able to collect their belongings. So most of them most of the people went to San Francisco, and a lot of people went back to Vancouver or Victoria. We did some research. We found some people. So this is something that we have been able to do at the 100-year anniversary of that we have built an arch. It's called Arch of Healing and Reconciliation. And at the same time, the county executive and the mayor of Bellingham were very receptive to the ideas, and they did not know. We pulled out all the archives. We have the same Bellingham Howard was there in early 1900s, and same Bellingham was there. When we then approached them, they were actually so nice to us. They gave us all those newspapers from those times. And then we reached the government archives at Western Washington University, and they also provided all the material. So this is the arch. It is made of granite. The granite actually came from India. It's called Indian red. Now it went to China. That's where they prepared the pillars, and it's all one piece, like 2 pillars and the top. And then it was finished in Canada and installed in the United States. And this is the day of unveiling the Arch of Healing. There's some pictures of that from that day. And this is the gathering. That day, all the people came. So another part of the thing is, when we were doing this research, we found out that in 1885, the same thing happened to Chinese, and it happened in Vancouver, BC, as well as in Bellingham. And then, of course, we all remember the 1943 devastation. So we didn't want to make this monument just for the Punjabi or Sikh or Indian people. We worked with them, and we said, we will create something, because it's the event. It's the treatment of other people, which is more important, not that a community or a B community. So we work with those communities together, and then we have put up plaques there recognizing each of the 3 events, as well as this is some of the things from the newspapers you saw from that time. And I'll share that. And this was kind of usually what depicting them, the people at that time. This is one of the survivors we found in, he's in Yuba City. We didn't find him. His son was 5 years old, and his other grandkids were there, and we were able to locate that families. And we devoted the Japanese family also, and we invited them that time to come. This is the new, this is the City Hall, now refurbished, but that's the City Hall, and the gathering next morning on September 5th outside the City Hall where this event happened. And these are some of the other pictures inside the jail. This is more pictures at the temple. And this is with the common executive. Not the Bellingham Herald, the editorial staff, a lot of people had forgotten about it. And when we archived everything and systemically had some conversations with the government people and the newspaper people, so on that day, the day before, on September 2nd, they published a full page apology. And they published all those articles from those days again, because they were actually part of the whole conspiracy to slave these things about 6 months before. It took 6 months to rile up all the people about this thing, and that's where we worked with them as well. And this joint backward proclamation by the Bellingham City and County Executive, that they said that this should. Our aim was not again. That's what our main purpose of this monument has been, that when the younger kids, new generation, future generations come, we should not forget the history, but we do not want to come in and get revenge, but as angry people, because we were not there, the people who suffered, they are not here. And people who did that, they were not here. But we should recognize events like this and make every effort that it does not get repeated. And that's why this wording of healing and reconciliation was very much accepted by all the people. It's really amazing that I was the first person who got elected, a colored person or an immigrant ever elected to Bellingham, Whatcom County and Council, a county court leader. And they placed in 2019, I got elected as county executive, and I got elected in 2023 again for my second start. So this is another thing that we can see, that there are some racist people, but the communities are not racist. We should recognize there are always very good people in every community, and people you can connect with, people you can work with. And so this is, yes. So I will stop here, and we make Q&A back in time. That's that. Thank you very much. Okay.
Well, thank you, Tom, for organizing this panel, and for all of you. This is great, and I'm echoing what Sharon said about, I'm not going to talk about the bigger goals. Could you guys represent, and I'm going to dig in a little bit more to some of the detail for Oregon and on the history side of documenting this history. Sorry, yeah, good. Okay, let me get that. So, you should much closer. Yeah, it put it closer. Better. You know, you should ship it. Can you hear me now? So, I have been researching early South Asian communities in Oregon for quite some time. And my motivation has been to diversify our stories and our archive, as other speakers have spoken to use history as a means for challenging the white supremacy and nativism that infest our governance and public sphere. So this book, Punjabi Rebels, is a culmination of my work to date, my guide for making this incredible history more broadly recognized in the landscape discussion. So for some years now, I've been getting requests from people emailing, calling, asking for sites to tour this history. And I'm really convinced at this point that there's a better way to do this than be sending out funky emails. So I'm hoping we get Nicole's recommendations, and that's my sense on doing that. So my hope is that the community of people that I work with, meet my friends, is here with me today, has been a part of it, that we hope to develop a self-guided tour with markers at key sites and QR codes throughout that can illustrate and complicate these stories for a multitude of participants. I would like to see it promoted by state tourism agencies, historical institutions, and other organizations. For me, this work is about the importance of seeing, imagining, and marking our environment with a multitude of time and stories that built this place and contribute to on today in complicated ways, both good and bad. So I really very much welcome your input, including on best practices and finding peace too. So this is where I started. Sharon is familiar with this now a long time ago, but just trying to get a handle on who was in Oregon and where, and using all the typical records I'm sure people are familiar with, censuses, court cases, newspaper, until we can't get you in the back at all. Sorry.
I asked them to turn the mic up as well.
Can you put the mic in front of your neck? If you can hold it in front and talk straight into it, have a big up front, it's pretty sailor. And okay, here we go. Here, other. You need to teach the boy. Okay, so for me, this work is about the importance of seeing, imagining, and marking our environment with a multitude of lives and stories that built this place and contribute to our today in complicated ways, both good and bad. So this river map is where I started, and using all the records I talked about. From 1905 to 1914, this was a community of perhaps 500 to 700 Indian men laboring and working mainly along the Columbia River in Oregon. After World War I, Indians largely left Oregon, and a new community basically not appeared there until the 1970s. But besides the simple fact of Indians being in Oregon are the monumental narratives and of agency and empowerment that go with this community and these places. So I am incredibly grateful to the Oregon Historical Quarterly. It's been a critical tool, and this history is becoming more widely known, fostering community engagement. OHQ has helped carry these stories into the press, the school curriculum, religious groupings, small towns, and many other places. Combined with the map I showed you, the journal highlights the interrelated issues we aim to memorialize and popularize. First, starting with the left, is the formation of the Revolutionary Independence Party known as GOTHR in Astoria in 1913. And GOTHR being why I believe most Indians left Oregon during World War I. The second is the 1910 St. John's, so-called the anti-Hindu riot, that included India's protracted resistance and GOTHR organizing arising in its way. Third is Bhagat Singh, who lived amongst GOTHR activists and used Oregon petitions for U.S. citizenship was denied by the U.S. Supreme Court. He was also deeply involved in the New Thought religious movement that swept the U.S. in these years. Finally, winding through all of these stories is the everyday of where men worked, lived, and socialized. So we've done one marker. This plaque was done collaboratively with the Classic County Historical Society director, with a historian in India by the name of Dr. Harish Puri, several global GOTHR activists, and myself. It was unveiled by the Astoria mayor and at this 100-year commemoration of GOTHR in Astoria in 2013. And it was a 3-day event funded by the city and attended by almost 300 people from across the U.S. and the Canadian West. Great as this event was, it was also not without issues. The event was primarily attended by Indians, with very few white community members from Astoria or the surrounding areas, reflecting, I think, which has kind of been a stubborn issue, a kind of a siloed attitude towards this history. It's for Indians. And then the plaque was stolen in 2017. This remains an unsolved crime, though many of us have our suspicions, but it was replaced and rededicated and angered with a whole lot more sand.
There you go.
There are a number of other places to make known in Astoria, like the area where Indians worked and lived. The Hammond Mill and bunkhouses in the background no longer exist, but a few of the workmen's homes in the foreground remain in the east end of town. There are also other possible housing and sporting sites scattered up around through the town of Astoria. This is where the GOTHR held its founding conference. It also no longer exists. There was a very large fire in Astoria in the 1920s that took it out. But the hall speaks to the kinds of political alliances and communities that Indians made and their internationalism, which I think is a relevant message for today. And something you talked about, showing the opportunity and colonial laborers and how they exchange basically attitudes, what's happening in the news, how to go about dealing with colonial authorities. So Astoria was the place where GOTHR was the main founding convention, but there were multiple meeting sites all along the Columbia River that preceded that meeting. And I don't have exact locations other than the towns, but there are certain gatherings happen anywhere from 20 to 100 men in these towns that I've marked. Moving along to the second segment is St. John's, which is now a Portland neighborhood, and documenting the 1910 riot and Indians' resistance, including the beginnings of government. In March of 2020, a group of us were aimed to sort of commemorate the riot. COVID had other plans, and we hope to make it happen in March of 2025 and invite you to join us. But while our plans didn't materialize, others stepped up with this public protest art. And so it's Black Lives Matter Summer in Portland was kind of a hot thing. And I think it's a measure of the social question some of this history has become, which again, the quarterly, Oregon Historical Quarterly had a lot to do with that. So these two sites no longer exist, but we know where they are in Reitman Center of Tamron. And we documented, we've documented a lot of other sites in St. John's related to this, to the riot, to the court cases that followed. But the one I have to say I am most excited about is this Conchi Ron's residence was behind a machine shop walked from St. John's Lumber that employed many Indians. While it no longer exists, this is nonetheless kind of other holy ground. After the 1910 riot, St. John's slavers began meeting and studying, as they put it, the cause of their disrespect. And in the fall of 1912, they invited Deol, a radical nationalist thing living in San Francisco, to come and meet with them. And he finally made it up in March of 1913 and met with laborers and Ron's residents here, and Governor was conceived. And from this meeting, they organized gatherings in small river towns I illustrated on that earlier map. So the third piece is the story of Bhagat Singh Tin. He worked with Governor. He enlisted in the U.S. military while he was in Oregon. And this was the case that went all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court and denying Indian citizenship for decades. And there are a number of sites relevant to Tin in and around Portland. And besides Tin's case standalone importance, his citizenship case ties to Portland's prosecution apparatus and atmosphere during World War I, targeting notable radicals and immigrants. And on the note at the KKK, the prosecutor who insisted that Tin not get citizenship, we have him in picture with the KKK and Tony's too, right before you file the case to not deny or fight his citizenship. Tin was also, as I mentioned, deeply connected to New Thought movement that was active in Portland and nationally and shaped many decades of his life. So quickly, I wanted to highlight the importance of documenting more every day where men worked and lived and recreated. For example, this factory still stands. It was a cordage factory that made ropes that employed a number of Indians. I also have addresses for Indian housing, stories about popcorn vendors who worked downtown, and about one marriage that occurred. Indians were also noted athletes, and not just in their own community. Portland, Astoria, and other North Oregon newspapers covered Indian matches. I haven't yet located those sites, but I got some place names to do it. So I hope this gives a sense of what we have to work with and what we have so far. But the question for me is also how best to do this work. Our received history is a measure of societal values of who counts. Rectifying history is central to social justice, but it's never as straightforward as simply making lost history known. Indians' Oregon story was lost due to white supremacy and class suppression, and we need a reframed narrative, a different story, not just the addition of South Asians into what exists. How can public history contribute to that project? Thank you very much.
So I'll say thank you once again to all the speakers. I had an amazing time. I was very intentional in inviting all four of these individuals because I wanted them all in one space together. A lot of email exchanges between all the individuals. The first time I'm meeting
3 of the 4.
Yeah, so thank you all once again, and could we just get another huge round of applause? I want to open it up to Q&A and discussion portion, and I did want to give the panelists an opportunity, but to also just ask each other questions, because I know, they work in similar fields, but are also working different locations. But for that, I also wanted to just open up to the audience as well and see if there's any questions, or if you guys want some time, kind of think through the questions, then possibly just get started. The panelist question. I think a good point to start is also simply with what some of the questions that Johanna have posted. And, this is to everyone else on the board as well. How do we not simply just add South Asians to the existing place narratives of Oregon or other spaces in the Pacific Northwest or the U.S., Canada, but change how people conceive of this place? How do we complicate our collective stories?
They love it yourself. They just all lost so that and just. But I do like to you paid 7 questions. I think that would be anything intriguing to you, or do you want to know? Maybe I can start with the history of the arch. I think this is one of the things that the events happened. We discovered those things. We talked about the monolith community, locally, and then there's the block. But this is something that I want to commend the whole community of Bellingham, and we got assistance from some people in Vancouver or Abbotsford to be able to do that. The project was conceived as a $100,000, so it was not something small. That we were told that you go get a stone and put a plaque in one corner of the library or something. And but the community felt that we really want to do something substantial. And making arches is a traditional Indian tradition that any big events are memorized by building an arch or a big doorway or a gateway, so forth. So, and we went to the Whatcom Community Foundation. The Adoptive Community Foundation in our community was the first one to write us a $25,000 check. And then the Sikh Temple at that time in Whatcom County, they wrote a $50,000 check. I mean, that something was very incredible. But I think what happened is that when we did this in 2007, the local government and local community was really surprised learning all the things. And by the way, Bellingham had also been a KKK town, early 60s. So knowing the background and everything, and people found out that there was a overwhelming support for the community, but there was no answer what we're going to do with it. And it took us 10 years from 2007 to 2017. And like I mentioned before, the most intriguing thing was we did not want to do it only for one event. We wanted to do it for the behavior of community at a certain time towards the immigrants. It didn't matter if they were from China, it didn't matter if they were Japanese or others. So we start doing this research and found out, and then we had plaques. We reached out to the Chinese community and Japanese community, which are fairly small in Bellingham, but they were they became involved actively with that, and that's why we were able to achieve that. In the city of Bellingham, this is a place where the arch is right in front of the city hall. So it was not some forsaken corner of the street that go building there. I think that's another great thing, that where we built these things, so the visibility is there and the recognition that's there. So I just wanted to share that.
I just want to kind of answer, and then maybe I can go to your question after the back. I just want to answer one of the questions here about how do we complicate our collective stories. And I always love to think about futuristic thinking when we answer these questions, because when we attend these conferences and tell these fascinating histories and stories, we relegate ourselves into a past only. And I'm really interested in talking about the past, but as a pathway to what's going to happen in the future. So I was really, really struck by Deborah Way's pictures of her daughters protesting, and I think it was her son in one of her slides this morning. And I was like, what are we doing to perpetuate our nieces and nephews and children or grandchildren or family members or cousins to continue to do the work of preservation, of history, of culture, of storytelling, of museum work, of curatorial work, you know? To me, that is really, really important. It is so valuable now more than ever. But I don't see enough of that happening. Like, I don't see enough of value of that work happening, of the arts, of culture, in relationship to these really important histories and stories, because there is a way to connect the past to the present and the future. So I'm always thinking, I have two boys, they're 15 and 13. So my boys have been to every Heritage Museum exhibit opening since they were 5 years old. Whether they liked it or not, they went to when Johanna and I worked together to do the other exhibit, they were there. They went to, every exhibit. And something about that has entered their mind, at least. There's a granularity of memory making and understanding of activism in our communities and solidarity in our communities. I there taught with Lucy Bell, who's a Haida repatriation activist, who I'm lucky enough to call a dear friend. My son, 13 years old, went with me and saw her talk about her fight for Haida repatriation, right? These things really matter because we don't often teach our children the value of history and storytelling. So I'm really interested in complicating history, but also thinking about how we're mentoring young people as well.
So with that, maybe I can continue the question and then conversation, because I think you showed us the slide and you told us, 100 years later, we had this, that the owner who was donating lumber, was the first KKK member. And so other than sort of stating, I'm just wondering, how does that change? How does that change how we think about, the giving of the lumber? How does that change our perception? Should it? How should it? And then how do we explain it to whether it's our children or adults?
I wanted just taking up the mic, but I think I need to answer that question specifically. It absolutely should change how we tell the history of Abbotsford's community history of the Sikh Heritage Museum or Bainiwal in Abbotsford. But it doesn't mean, like Satpal and Gulji was saying, that we assume that the entire community sucks. And just talk about our communities as a deficit. I think this is what I mean. History is such a beautiful thing because it is complicated for that very reason. My struggle is that I'm irritated that for 100 years an archive can exist and it leads to the perpetuation of a white nostalgia in our communities, which is a language that I'm trying to really write about more often, this idea of nostalgizing white histories by covering up, truths.
Yes.
And so that's why when I tell these stories now, I start exactly as I did by saying, did you know that the founder donated the lumber? And everybody is taken aback and they're like, wow, bridge building, beautiful. And then I say, did you also know? And then they have the exact reaction that the audience just had. And I do that to create complexity in one's own mind around how history is done. I think we always want to look as a society for simplistic answers. We want to know who's good, who's bad. But that's not how history operates. History is very complex. I also want to make sure that in our communities, we redress these histories collectively as a community. Can't just be the racialized women who are having to redress these histories and do the labor of the work of, talking about the KKK in Abbotsford. But unfortunately, that's what it's been so far. So I want to see municipal leaders step up. I want to see people in institutional positions and power step up and say, we acknowledge this has happened, much like the Bellingham Herald did. To me, that is incredible. I wish more newspapers would redress their histories and say, splash, this is what we've done. And let's redress how we're going to change that. I'm not going to take the mic anymore, so something else can speak.
And I just wanted to, something came to my mind since I got in politics for the last 10, 12 years. I think that if we look at America is the only country, some part of Canada as well, which has this unique feature, means that it's people, everybody is immigrant. if you look at the rest of the nations world, there are Native people are in control of it. There's been very less or few migration for particular purpose. People go work in Middle East, or people go there and then they come back. But America is very unique. And if you look at the initial wars between Irish and the Italians in New York and Philadelphia, you can see that this thing is old. It's not only because that people from Asia came, but people were looking for, we have been here before and new people are coming. They were just afraid they're gonna take away our livelihood or our dominance. And it has happened in different states, different communities in different ways. And that's very unique to America.
I think it's the people with privilege that happened in Australia. Well,
Yes.
100%. And tying that with the questions in the back about sort of how do we handle that stuff is one is I think it leads to a conversation about similarities. And we can talk about that from a number of angles. Quotes back in the day, present day, that was an issue I know during Black Lives Matter was what does the history of Black Americans have to do with Indian Americans in this country, and how does that overlap? And some of those were very fraught conversations, but really important ones too. So I think it's those kinds of things. But I think your point about sort of the systemic, the global nature of these questions and sort of global colonialism, yeah. As Shar keeps saying, this is complicated history, right? And we cannot be the ones that simplify it, you know? And for example, I spent probably 6 months trying to figure out in my head a banner I read from about the 1910s that said, from South Africa, that said, workers of the world unite for a white South Africa. Now just wrap your head around that for a minute, you know? And Ann Dillard wrote a book about Bellingham, talking about socialists being a part of the 1885 attack on Chinese, you know? And so there's the whole question of like, what's the system? What's the mindset? You know, and for me, a lot of it is how it's embedded in the global labor system, you know, and really trying to parse that out. But I also think it's a bright line to why is Trump so popular? You know, it's the aggrieved whiteness in terms of you're supposed to have first place. You know, this is my country. I get first place. I get first choice in jobs. And when that meets any concept of a hard time, then it gets ugly fast, you know? And so I think we have to do that hard work of drawing those lines. And I think you're absolutely right about pointing to the global nature of it. Thanks for your question. I think that's a great question, and it reminds me of questions that like my students ask me of like, okay, so what do you want us to do with this? And it's a tough question to ask when you're facing issues like this, and you know obviously that they are important, that they inform your life on an intimate level, but then also what does this serve the world, right? And I think each of us is asking for a very active sense of reflexivity, like we're asking to look back and then reflexivity with purpose. I think that's the intention here, right? Of looking back towards the past to understand what purpose can I use that towards to understand my world today, right? And like the example that I gave of trying to give like a story of, starting in British Columbia and ending at the border in just 2 decades. That's a 2-decade story of the second Gurdwara, Sikh temple being built in the Imperial Valley. Now, the second temple that was built in the Imperial Valley was built by some laborers that worked in those umbrellas, and they moved further and further down south. So you see them bringing their own interpretations of the Sikh faith to that space. That's still in function today. Why is that the Sikh temple in the border that serve those detainees that are leaving the ICE detention centers and have nowhere to go? Why are they giving them housing and clothing? Why is there such a very key political nature to that Gurdwara space that you can see echoes of that within Stockton, and you can see echoes of that in the early built communities here in the Pacific Northwest. And that's where our past really takes us. And then so people who are part of that Sangha or that community in the Imperial Valley down south in California, we're the folks that are now making decisions of where we want that temple space to go, how we want to memorialize that past and the decisions that we're making. And we can see that, right? Like the way that the decisions that people made in the Pacific Northwest are really influencing the politics there. And it's to understand like the emergence of diaspora. I mean, it's a question too of like the strategy, the purpose behind using Asian in some contexts and then using our specific communities in other contexts. When is it purposeful and intentional to call myself Asian American, to connect with other communities? And when is it intentional and purposeful for me to say I'm a Sikh American woman, right? I think it's the same kind of reflexivity that we're asking for here as well, right? My name is Johanna, and I'm from Spokane. And I came in especially for this forum, so I'm really glad to see you out here. I immigrated about 12 years ago. We came to Houston. 13 years ago, came to Houston about 3 years. I've been in Spokane about 12 years. One of the biggest issues that I've had is finding any historical references or information out and about, but I'm not a historian. And the only thing that I came close to was actually just finding information about, because of Expo 74, which is the world's largest environmental theme fairs that happened at 74 in Spokane. We just had fucking get their 10th anniversary. So there was a lot of memorialization of, Chinese workers lived here, and then this was taken up at Cat Valley was noon for night. And, you've got this beautiful park in the middle of the city, and like, yeah, but you lost all those Chinese workers where did they go from there? And in the Northwest Railroad was built on their backs. Where are you memorializing that? So there's so much grandeur, and it's like the biggest part that whole white supremacist culture thing, the dominant culture thing, right? If they are willing to give any kind of ground, is to because now the Native Americans are standing up and fighting for their rights and becoming the top prominent of that. Therefore, they now acknowledge that. So the only time is like, let's do that county to that's down it up. But at least it's a start. But at the end of the day, when does a person like me go where this will can for in some other second largest songs that's the federal state ends? So how do we normalize our histories and normalize the contributions of Asians? And yes, you're 100% right. Like when I tell people I'm Asian, they were like, when I looked at the map of the world, Pakistan was very much in Asia. So, how do we do this? And the body, I said I wasn't going to take the mic, but I'm just going to be quick about that. I think relationship building really matters a lot in how you're able to infiltrate multiple systems at multiple times. I just randomly received a text message from a former student of mine who's now a middle school social studies teacher. And he's like, look, I'm citing your PhD, and here's a picture of your definition about colonialism. If it was not for me being an educator, being the only racialized woman in my entire history department, teaching that, and him being in my class, he would then not be able to take that forward into the K-12 system and say, did you know this person exists? We have relationships purposefully, and I think we need to start leveraging our relationships. I feel like we're often taught that that's shameless, like we should plug ourselves, especially as women. We're taught that a lot in many ways. But I think there is a lot of power in us saying, make sure that you do cite me. Make sure that you do acknowledge that this is a racialized woman doing this work. Here is quote them, cite them, cite their exhibit, and take that forward into the careers you're going. The reason why I'm obsessed with mentorship is because when we have relationships with younger people who, again, are entering these multifaceted fields of education, arts, heritage, whatever, they take what they have in terms of a relationship with you into those spaces. They take those social relationships into those spaces. If we don't have that, it stays the same. it stays, a very monolith understanding of the world, a very monolith understanding of social capital or social relationships. I don't like the word social capital, right? So I do think we need to start really leveraging our relationships. It's a skill that we just had. Why not be able to use that and tell people to just continue it, move it forward, pay it forward, and mentor others as well?
I'll give you an example. Right after 9/11, the next day, actually same day, same evening, there were some young people came in a pickup truck and at the Sikh Tejpaul, and they had throwing eggs at the sign. Right in front, we have like 10 acres of place there. And our neighborhood white lady, she got out and she started yelling at them. These were like high school kids, and they got scared and they laughed. And then we got the phone call. And what I'm trying to say that we have ordinances of us, how we immediately called the sheriff, we immediately called the Belgian Health, and us and other people. And that weekend, 300 people came with flowers to the temple to say, no, we are with you. Because everybody wearing a turban was supposed to be Osama's cousin. So, and the other part is, right after that, roughly a month after that, we formed a group of about 7 or 8 people. There was a Catholic person, myself, there was a Muslim person, there was a Lutheran, and a Jewish person. So we made a program for almost 6 months. We invited every high school we asked them to invite us, and we would go at lunchtime, talk to the faculty. We went to all the university, different colleges there, and we would say, we are here, ask us questions. We didn't want to go, I'm so-and-so, I'm so-and-so. We just did introduction, and we wanted people, what is on your mind? What you ever wanted to ask us, and this is your opportunity today. And also, why people have different type of comments and things about people who look differently on their dress, on their turban, or something else. So let's talk about it. I think what that did, it opened up a lot of people. People are people. Until you open up and start conversation, and they want to know, what kind of God are you afraid to be? Like, these are so simple, basic things, but people are curious, and then if they don't know, they create some kind of apprehension about it. So I think the onus is on the minority communities as well to come out and stand up and talk. And when this thing happened in 2007, we went to the government, the mayor, and the county executive and the council members, everything, and told them all this. That I think if we just kept quiet, nothing could have happened. Mm-hmm. So I think that is important for communities to stand up and make your voice heard. Like that.
I guess I would also say if there's a community in the historical museum in Spokane, there it is, on the university, actually, they may be, I can go put some mail on them. They're traveling in exhibits from other historical associations throughout that region. There are speakers that'll come. I mean, and I don't like saying this, but I think it is, because I have a mixed feeling about saying it's up to you to go demand it. They should be doing it. But unfortunately, a lot of times that's what's going on. And I think that atmosphere for a lot of people right now is they get that there are more people understanding they need to do this kind of work. That's where my interest came, was after 9/11 and going to the historical community. I hadn't been trained yet, and saying we have to do more of this work. And I was ready to stop working with a lot of institutions because they weren't. It was a white pioneer narrative, and I wanted nothing to do with that. So I think there are openings, and still fight, I just.
just want to say thank you once again. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for this panel. Can we get one more round of applause?